Thank you for being here. We'll now start our program with the tolling of the bell. If everyone would stand.
Please be seated. I'd like to welcome you all to York County's celebration for Veterans Day. My name is Lois Winter, and I'm chairman of the York County Historical Committee that sponsors this event. I'm going to briefly tell you about some of the other events we sponsor before we start, because we are in the business of promoting and celebrating the amazing history that has happened here in Yorktown. We are so proud of it. It is this year the sesquicentennial anniversary of the Civil War on the peninsula, and you will find out in the lobby some brochures. You're welcome to take one of those for free that explains the role that York County played in the Civil War. It tells the whole story of that. We've also sponsored a lecture series that has people, local experts from York County, telling about events and sequence of events that have happened in the Civil War that we've also done. There's also a play, which you'll hear more about later, that's going on right now in the freight shed that is based on letters from a Civil War soldier to his wife. And this is called Letters from the War, so it's very appropriate. We also sell books that are out there. Those are not free. They're $20. They are on New York County history, and the new one out is on African American history. Something else that you should notice as you're leaving is the monument in front of this building, because that is a monument that has the names of anyone who's ever died in wars from York County. So as you walk by, take a look at that. And then I would like to thank Tim Smith, who runs this ceremony and the Memorial Day ceremony, for not only putting it together, but if you would like to know about any of the names listed on that monument, this is the person to ask. He's very knowledgeable about it, and he can tell you quite a lot. He gave one of the lectures in our series about the people from York County who fought in the Civil War. So I would like to introduce to you Tim Smith, who is so excellent at putting together these programs, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. We really appreciate everyone being here. Our first letter, during the American Revolution, we tried to tie it into Yorktown. So I'm going to put on some Benjamin Franklin glasses here. And on the road to Yorktown, Sergeant Joseph Plume Martin, Corps of Sappers and Miners, Continental Army. We're prepared to move down and pay our old acquaintance, the British, at Yorktown a visit. I doubt not, but their wish was not to have so many of us come at once, as their accommodations were rather scanty. They thought the fewer the better cheer. We thought the more the merrier. We had come a long way to see them, and they were unwilling to put us off with excuses. At this time, we'd like to have Veterans of Foreign War Post 824 post our colors.
Post. Post. Seat.
If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Our second letter is from the War of 1812. How many of you know what year that started? I would like to introduce Mr. Mike Steen. Mike's the education director at the Waterman's Museum down here. I've known Mike since, I think, 1991 when we did the 300th anniversary activities here in Yorktown. He's an excellent historian, has spent a lot of time at many of the historic sites in Virginia. Mike.
Royal Prison, Dartmoor, October 12, 1814. Dear Sally, it was with regret that I have oft to inform you of my unhappy situation that is. Confined here in a loathsome prison where I've worn out almost 9 months of my days, and God knows how long it will be before I shall get my liberty. I cheer my drooping spirits by thinking of the happy day when we shall have the pleasure of seeing you and my friends. Signed, Perez Drinkwater.
Thank you, Mike. At this time, I'd like to recognize our guests. Our Board of Supervisors aren't here, and they're at a board study, a getaway at the homestead, the entire board, so they weren't able to come. It always happens to hit us a couple of times during our Veterans Day service. But we also have here our historical committee members. You'll recognize them. They're wearing the maroon shirts with the historical committee logo. We've got a number of men from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 824 here, Disabled American Veterans Chapter 13, and the National Society of the Daughters of American Revolution, the Comte de Grasse chapter. And we appreciate all of you coming and helping us out with our ceremony today. Our next letter is from the American Civil War. Our area was affected quite a bit by that time, and it's another tie into Yorktown. How many of you know where Camp Winfield Scott is? How many of you know where Marlbank is? Marlbank was Camp Winfield Scott during the American Civil War. It was the headquarters of General McClellan. And Lieutenant James Fisher, 10th Infantry Sykes Brigade, which is part of the U.S. Regulars. Most units at that time were regiments from states, but he was one of the regulars. He was from Delaware. Anyway, he writes to his dad and mom from Camp Winfield Scott, April 21st, 1862. Very nearly all the male inhabitants of this section of the country have gone to war. The females generally are secessionists, but you can get anything they have for a coin. The piece of gold will open their hearts at once. All that I have seen so far say their husbands are drafted into the rebel service. They have plenty of shin plaster up from 2 to 10 cents, but you can get a whole load of it for a quarter. James Fisher, 10th Infantry Sykes Brigade. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker. We're going to get the official introduction out, but I met Mike in 2008, I guess it was, when our sons started VMI together, and we live in the same neighborhood, and have had the pleasure of many times sitting around at tailgates and different things and talking about history, and he's got such a rich history in military service with his family. Chief Warrant Officer 5, retired, Michael R. Gwinn, entered the active duty in February of 1977. Chief Gwinn attended basic training and advanced individual training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and served 2 years with the 10th Combat Engineer Battalion in Germany. In 1975, Chief Gwinn attended Warrant Officer Candidate and Flight School in Fort Rucker, Alabama, graduating in May of 1980. Aviation Warrant Officer CW5 Gwynn's assignments include 2nd of the 17th Cavalry, 101st Airborne Division, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Airborne. CW5 Gwinn served in Grenada, the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan before retiring in 2007 with over 30 years of active duty. His awards and badges include the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal Second Award, Joint Service Commendation Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, Master Aviator Badge, Parachutist Badge, Military Freefall Parachutist Badge. Chief Gwinn is the son of Colonel John and Ruth Gwinn. His father, Colonel John Gwinn, entered the U.S. Army shortly after Pearl Harbor in 1941 and served in the South Pacific as a navigator on B-25 bombers. Colonel Gwinn also served in Korea and retired from the U.S. Air Force in 1965. Chief Gwinn is married to former Kelly Edmonds, who is the assistant principal of B.C. Charles Elementary School in Newport News. They have 1 son, Second Lieutenant Michael T. Gwinn. I won't say Tolly because that's what they call him. He's currently serving as an infantry officer stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, and he's currently in Ranger School there. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Chief Michael R. Gwinn.
Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today and participate in this great ceremony honoring the veterans of our armed forces. I'd like to thank Tim Smith for inviting me, and I'd also like to thank the organizers of this event. I don't know them all, but they've done a wonderful job supporting it. I'd also like to very much thank all the veterans in attendance today for their service. I'm sure I'll do that one or two more times in this discussion. President Woodrow Wilson first proclaimed Armistice Day on November 11th, 1919, to honor the veterans of World War I. In 1945, a World War II veteran by the name of Raymond Weeks had the idea to expand Armistice Day to include all veterans. Mr. Weeks' idea was widely embraced by many, including General Dwight Eisenhower, resulting in the first official Veterans Day celebration in 1947. Yesterday, the official Veterans Day, and today, countless other Veterans Day ceremonies, many similar to this one, have occurred around the United States. It is fitting and proper to do so, as our country was founded on principles that we hold dear, and our servicemen and women have defended those principles in our way of life, fought for our country in our way of life, and died for our country in our way of life in countless battles since 1776. Regardless of where those other ceremonies occur, I can't think of a more fitting site than right here in Yorktown, arguably the true birthplace of our country, the site where in 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered to General George Washington as we marched toward our freedom. I'd like to apologize for not wearing my uniform today. I'm sure that most of you who are not currently in active duty can still wear yours, but for some reason mine have all shrunk. I'm not sure how that happened. Now, I'm going to throw Tim under the bus a little bit. Tim told me this was a Veterans Day ceremony, and although it was Veterans Day, I could basically speak about anything I wanted to. And I don't believe anybody's ever told me that, and I'm certainly sure my wife has never told me that. So I'm going to start with a little about myself, not because I'm unique or special, but because I'm just another veteran like many of you out there today. So this is the story of the making of a vet. I enlisted in the Army in 1976, not out of a profound patriotic calling. Like many kids my age in the 70s, I was restless and knew I needed to get on with something, whatever that might be. My dad had retired from the military and was a veteran of World War II in Korea. 3 of his brothers were also veterans of World War II, 1 killed in combat in the Pacific. I have cousins that were also veterans, veterans of Vietnam, veterans are serving today. Serving in the military seemed like an appropriate thing for me to do, and it felt admirable. I still remember vividly the night in February 1977 when Dad drove me to the MEP station in Beckley, West Virginia to head out to basic training. I was more than a little scared, wondering what the heck I'd signed up for. The key point is that I signed up. I volunteered, and I made my own decision. This is true of every serviceman and every servicewoman serving today, every soldier in the Army. Like many of these volunteers, I joined to learn a skill and travel the world. Serving my country added a little icing to the cake. I entered active duty in the U.S. Army that February 1977 as a private, attending basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I continued on to become an engineer and was assigned to Germany. Fortunately, I had a great first sergeant and a great West Point second lieutenant as a platoon leader in the 10th Combat Engineer Battalion, and their example and mentorship pointed me in the right direction. They instilled values that I still carry with me today, and they stand as a shining example of leadership. The 1970s were dark days for the Army. With low pay, lousy equipment, disgruntled former draftees whose favorite setting was FTA, and I'm not going to explain that to the audience here. Despite this environment, something in the Army appealed to me. Something clicked. For some unknown reason, one of the favorite things for the combat engineers to do at that time was to hold formations. Every Monday was especially cherished with 5 formations: an accountability formation at 0500, a PT formation at 0600, a work call formation at 800, another formation at 1230, and I'm still not sure why they did that. And then finally, we would have a retreat at 1700. You would think that all this nonsense would convince any young man to find another occupation, but I especially liked retreat. There is still something magical about retiring of our nation's flag at the end of the day. Something truly special about retreat that literally makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I'm sure that many of my fellow veterans share the same feeling. Retreat to me is a time to reflect on the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who have fought the battles before me and will fight the battles when I'm gone. My family has an aviation background. My mother trained Army Air Corps cadets in World War II. My father was a navigator on B-25s in the South Pacific during World War II. He also served in Korea and retired as a colonel in the Air Force in 1965. So I ultimately wished to follow the aviation tradition, and upon arriving in Germany, promptly applied to Warrant Officer Flight School. I was accepted and attended flight school in 1979, and later I was a member of the prestigious 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And during my 30 years, as Tim said, of active duty, I served in Grenada, the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan prior to my retiring in 2007. Early in my career, when I came back from Somalia, my father, the World War II and Korea veteran, asked me how the skirmish went. To my dad's perspective, everything I had ever done was a skirmish. Among soldiers and veterans, some things just never seem to change. However, Dad stopped saying this after my second trip to Iraq. I've never begrudged Dad for calling my battles a skirmish, because in one way or another, every one of us is a veteran. Every one of us, every veteran, is a skirmisher. Each of us has a story. Each of us has served in good times and bad. Some never saw combat, but made sure that others had the equipment they needed to get there. Some never left the continental United States, but manned the missiles, operated the aircraft, and trained the troops for future battles. All of us, in our own way, fought the skirmishes that make up the life of every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. We fought the battles the country decided to fight, and we did it honorably. Some gave the ultimate sacrifice, and I think of friends and comrades who died in battle and also in training every day. I'd like to review some numbers and statistics relating to our veterans. This data is from the U.S. Census and several other of the news agencies. As of the 2010 census, there were 22,658,000 veterans in America. 8% of those are female. As of September 30th, 2011, there were 1,981,000 living veterans from World War II. My dad at 97 being one of them. About 800 of these World War II veterans die every day. There are fewer living veterans today than at any point since World War II. Since that horrible day in September 11th, 2001, 2,333,972 United States servicemen and women have been deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, or both. Of that, over 1,353,000 have left the service. I guess I'm included in that group. As of the 2010 census, there were 2,317,761 Americans in uniform, which includes active duty, National Guard, and reserves. The total U.S. population in 2010 was a little over 308,745,000, which means that Americans in uniform as of 2010 comprised less than 1% of our country's total population. I bring this up because as veterans, we are a dwindling and decreasing population. This is probably a good thing, and that maybe our skirmishes are fewer or less deadly. Maybe technology is making us better, more able to defend ourselves. But I think that the world can still be a difficult and dangerous place, and that people exist that will not agree with our way of life and seek ways to do us harm. Our armed forces exist to protect us, to protect our families, and protect our way of life. God bless them in this day to remember their sacrifices. To forget our veterans is to forget the blood, sweat, and tears that have been spent by these heroes and their families to ensure our way of life. We must never forget. Forgetting veterans will become easier as time goes by. My son is a second lieutenant in the infantry. He is our only child. I have many friends who are not veterans, who have never served, who cannot even imagine why my son would go in the military. Like it or not, we have become a society where, in many cases, servicemen and women beget servicemen and women. Many say we need to reinstitute the draft, but be realistic. Whom would we draft with less than 1% of the population in service to our country? The U.S. Census says that over 19 million students will be enrolled in colleges and universities this fall. This year, there were less than 6,000 Army ROTC graduates, my son being one of them from VMI. And that's just a little throw-in for him because I wanted to say that because I'm proud of him. All right. But less than 6,000 total Army ROTC students were commissioned in the Army in the spring of 2012, and there's 19 million college students. So ask yourself again, who would you draft? Let's hope and pray that we never need to have a draft again like World War II, but let us continue to revere these young men and women who do decide to serve our country in uniform. I read recently that a poll of U.S. citizens gave the military an 82% approval rating. That 82% rating is rightfully deserved. Today's servicemen and women raised their hands to swear to defend the Constitution in a time of war, the longest war our country has ever fought. 82% seems low to me. I have to think that the other 18% just disagree with a cause that they've attached to our military, not with their service. But the military doesn't pick their causes or wars, they just fight the battles. To all of you retirees and veterans, I thank you for your contributions to our nation's defense. I'm proud to be one of you. To all the active duty servicemen and women, I salute your continued service to our country. You are truly the best example of what makes this nation great, and one day I hope to welcome you into our ranks as veterans. And to those young men and women who may choose to serve in our great military sometime in the future, it won't be easy. In fact, at times, it will be downright tough, even heartbreaking. And there will be times when you will wonder whether it was worth it. But when that moment hits you and you wonder what it's all about, go to retreat. Look up at our flag being retired for the day and realize that our democracy, this nation, is still young and needs people like you to stand up for its principles. You will know you're doing the right thing. God bless America.
Mike, could you step back up here a second? We'd like to present you with a little thank you. This is the British surrender at Yorktown, which is, everybody knows where Yorktown is, I assume. And if you look real close, Washington is being flown in on a Black Hawk right up in the corner for the surrender ceremonies. Cornwallis refused to show up, so anyway, he's coming in, and but that's up there if you look real hard.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
Let me give you the cover for it, too.
Right,
Thank you, Mike.
thanks.
Before I go to read the next letter, a short story. I talked to and interviewed a lot of veterans over the years, and one day we had a fellow we hauled boats for at our boat yard. We had his boat up and put it off, and he came over to pay his bill, and it was pouring down rain. It was raining very hard, so he came in the shop. We were sitting around the shop, and I was talking to him, and I knew he had served in a variety of conflicts. So, well, he was an Air Force pilot. He flew P-38s in World War II. Sabres in Korea and Phantoms in Vietnam. And it was Mr. Crutchlow from Seaford. And I said, well, which ones were the hardest to fly? He said, the P-38s, because you had so little as far as things to fly with. You know, your amount of instruments were very small. And he said, but I think, I've always thought about it, but I think the first person I shot down, the first shoot down, was a British Air Force pilot. So it's a little aside there on those kind of times. But if you get a chance to talk, like Mike said, every veteran's got a story, and I think the stories tell a lot about who we are as a nation. Our next letter is from the First World War. And this is from a fellow, Private Clarence Price, 93rd Division. 93rd Division was raised strictly as an African-American division in the First World War, and they actually ended up being some of the first troops to go over. They won all types of awards, were an exquisite unit, and they served under the French, under American generalship, but under the French part of the time. This letter is from July 13th, France, 1918. My dear mother, I've been living in 2 towns since I've been here, but I don't know the name of either one of them. The people I can't understand at all. I've not heard how Archie's getting along. We left him one of those little towns with the Red Cross people. He got his hand hurt. I was just 13 days and 13 nights on the great ocean. You remember one time when I was at home how we had an argument over it. Some said it took 6 days and some said another thing. Well, it took me 13 days and 13 nights, but we came over quickly enough at that. Private Clarence Price, 93rd Division, American Expeditionary Force. At this time, we'd like to recognize our veterans, and as we've done in the past, Mike and I will go to the back and escort the veterans up, and if you will follow us, all veterans, including those on the Historical Committee, come up here and turn and face everyone, and the Historical Committees can present everyone with a flower.
will serve who stand and wait.
Thank you. A fella sent me a photograph of a sign up in Pennsylvania that said for Veterans Day weekend, free oil change to Civil War veterans. So I thought that was interesting. People send me some odd things. I don't know if anybody takes it up on. If anybody takes them up on it, that'll be interesting too. Most everyone, if you're from Virginia, is familiar with the town of Bedford, Virginia, and during the Second World War, they had the company of the 116th Infantry out of Bedford had the largest loss of life of any town in the United States throughout the war. And there were two brothers in that group. It was a National Guard unit, and I think they lost 29 on the beach, and they lost another 15 to 20 men in the hedgerow fighting afterwards. And the two brothers' last names were Hoback. Well, the last, one brother survived D-Day, the other one did not. The one that survived just passed away this year. But this is a letter written back in 1944 about the Hobacks. So, dear Mr. and Mrs. Hoback, I really don't know how to start this letter to you folks, but we'll attempt to do something in words and writing. While walking along the beach D-Day, +1, I came upon this Bible, and as most any person would do, I picked it up from the sands to keep it from being destroyed. I imagine what has happened is your son dropped the book without any notice. Most everybody who landed on the beach D-Day lost something. Corporal H.W. Creighton, United States Army, France, July 19, 1944. Of course, at the time he found the Bible, he didn't realize that the one he lost had been lost in the battle. At this time, we'd like to ask our, we have two different groups laying wreaths today, the DAR Comte de Grace chapter and the Disabled American Veterans chapter 13. We'll be both be placing wreaths up here. If could everyone stand? Everyone can be seated. Our next letter is from Vietnam, February 18th, 1968. Dear Brother Kyron, right now I'm with the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta region. We live with the Navy on their ships, but when we go out on an operation, we're out in the paddies and jungles. I've been here for over a month and a half now, and I really wish I was back in my teens again and getting off that bus at 69th Street. Corporal Paul DiCaprio, United States Army, South Vietnam. Anybody here serve with the 9th? We've got a lot of Vietnam veterans here. At this time, we'd like to have the VFW retire the colors. Everyone can be seated. Before we close, I'd like to talk a bit about the letters some more. We've talked in the past, and all of you have seen them. You have them in your families from veterans. Now they're emails or Facebook messages, which you can't always save. But they're all important, especially if you're looking back from the past. I know, I think a couple of years ago or last year, Robert Myers, one of our committee members, was talking about the journal he kept doing, Desert Storm. And he said he really hadn't gone back and looked at it and thought about it much. But all those things are a part of history, but they're also part of the family. And, you know, save them, preserve them, set them aside, look for them in the family so they don't get lost, because we've lost so much of that. And it really tells our story as a nation. I'd like to close with a prayer that was written for General Patton in the Second World War on December 14th of 1944. He told his chaplain with the Third Army he wanted a prayer for good weather. And the chaplain O'Neill said, well, you want me to write a prayer about killing the enemy? He said, well, basically, good weather to kill the enemy, yes. And so he said, well, how do I do that? I couldn't find one anywhere. So he wrote this. And this was 2 days prior to the Battle of the Bulge. Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee of Thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains with which we've had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle. Graciously hearken us to us as soldiers who call upon Thee that, armed with Thy power, we may advance from victory to victory and crush the oppression and wickedness of our enemies and establish Thy justice among men and nations. Chaplain James H. O'Neill, Third Army. We'd like to thank all of you for being here today. We've got refreshments downstairs. Take a few minutes and get, talk to the vets and stop by and thank Disabled American Veterans Post 13. So anyway, thank you for coming out. Enjoy some refreshments downstairs and enjoy the rest of Veterans Day. Thank you.